right, so we are going to be ranking all the routes in 100 Line Last Defense Academy. Recently, we finished it. Gosh, we finished it last Saturday, late at night, and I didn't have time to do the tier list right after we finished Chapter 0. And we had gone backwards. When we started 100 Line Last Defense Academy 2, we had started going backwards in numbers from 21 to 1. That's just how it turned out. We decided to kill the traitor first and then go back on our initial first decision. And it just turned out that we were doing chapter 15 backwards. The criterias, and this is my first time like doing an official tier list with different kinds of criteria. So I might tweak them as we go along. Like if one bracket doesn't make sense over a number of routes, then we're just gonna skip it. So we're gonna go over like a brief summary of the scenario or the plot and how we feel the narrative was presented. What did it contribute to the lore? Did it expand our knowledge of the world? Character development and expansion, pacing, both for story and gameplay. I also put the subject matter because that could make or break whether I like a story or not. I have a pretty high tolerance for different subject matter, but there was some of them that made me feel a little uncomfortable. The effectiveness of the conflict. Did it present itself in a way that we got emotionally invested in the conflict that the characters were presented with, and things like that. How was the resolution? Was it satisfying, unsatisfying? Emotional connection to the characters. So those last three, they kind of go in hand. The intellectual or emotional payoff, how we felt, it all ties in together. So it's kind of like branching. And this is what I mean by like, if they end up being talked about all at once too often, then I'm just going to put them all together. So that, yeah, intellectual and emotional payoff at the end of the scenario, and then the consequences for the actions. Were the choices that you were given, did they feel like they really mattered? So those are the criterias that I went with initially, and this is all candid, not scripted. I am going to be ad-libbing a lot of what we're discussing. I would say for the first timeline, I would give it an S for a narrative. For the lore, it doesn't really expand our knowledge of the world, but it does lay out the groundwork. So in that sense, I would give it an S. Oh, sorry, an A. We're going S through D. For character development, it's not as juicy as the second time around, but there is some character development throughout the base timeline. I would give it an A. Pacing, I think the pacing was pretty good. It's just still kind of funny to call the base timeline the prologue, and it's 40 hours long, but like, I didn't find it dull. So I would give it an A, only because it's just funny to say that it's the prologue and it's 40 hours. The subject matter, I'm not docking on any points for subject matter, so I think I would give it like an A or an S. We should keep in mind that it is a story revolving around wartime. So there's a lot of subject matter that can be a little sensitive. But overall, I would say that it's not going to get docked any points per se for subject matter. But some characters, when they're first introduced and the way they talk, you're just like, I don't know how I feel about this. So maybe an A, actually, just to give it a little bit of a critique there. The effectiveness of the conflict, um, I think because there's so much mystery around everything going on, it's not very clear why we're fighting. And not being able to talk with the commanders makes it difficult to kind of get a feel for what they're about either. So I think I would give it an A. The resolution, was there really a resolution? We ended up going back in time to find a resolution. So I would give it an A or a B. Just because there wasn't really a resolution. It was a prologue to find a resolution. Emotional connection, there was quite a bit of emotional connection to the characters that we lost, the characters that were hurt throughout the timeline. And because you had like 40 hours with this cast, I would say that the emotional connection to the characters is an A. It could be higher. Intellectual and emotional payoff. I did really feel for Takumi at the end when Nozomi ended up passing away, and then her dying breaths was essentially her getting her memories back as his childhood friend. And the memories that you were getting throughout the timeline, it kind of like built on that emotional connection so that when she was gone, you really felt it. I would say that it is an A or an S. And then consequences of actions. Well, there was no consequences. There was three instances where you could make a decision, and whatever you said, it didn't matter. It didn't change the plot. It was very linear. So in that sense, I would say it's like there were consequences to the characters' actions, but there weren't consequences to the players' actions. It was very linear. So in that sense, I would give it a B or a C. So that being said, here is our beautiful tier list. So overall, I would put this one in A. So our first playthrough, we're gonna put it in an A. All right, narrative for the base timeline, I would give it an S. There was a lot of ups and downs, some wholesome moments, some comedic relief. But all in all, it was pretty decent narrative. The lore, expanded knowledge of the expanded knowledge of the world. Yes, we learned a lot of truths to a lot of mysteries that we had experienced throughout the other timelines that we had done. Character development and expansion, I would give it an S for all the characters that survived at the very least. Or you know what? It didn't really focus? It didn't focus on a specific character, but it was juicier than the first go around, so maybe an AS kind of thing. Pacing, story, or gameplay, that one's kind of hard to tell because we were going back and forth. But I would give it a similar rating to the base timeline of an A for story and gameplay. Subject matter, there was also a lot of there was some subject matter that was a little sensitive, so I would give that an A. Effectiveness of the conflict, I would give it an S. Being able to communicate with the commanders and getting our answers from C-Ray as to what we were doing, what our goal was, I think upped it from the base timeline from an A to an S. Resolution, I would give it an A or an S, only because most of the cast of characters didn't make it to the end. But Nozomi making that connection with the invaders at the end made it feel like there might be a resolution to the war. Emotional connection, S. Emotional payoff, S. Consequences of actions, I would also give it an S. And it's going to be an A or an S moving forward through quite a few of these because, well, us as the players' actions actually matter this time around. So if we pull up our tier list, I feel like it's going to be an S because I have just a few A's. Oh yeah, it's an S. Second scenario, S. So for the reset route, it's not very different from the second scenario, so I would still give it an S. Lore expansion, still give it an S because you're getting a lot of the same information. Character development and expansion, I would give it an A, only because of the memory wipe thing. Pacing and story, still give it an A. Subject matter, still give it an A. So a lot of like the same ratings, like I said. Effectiveness of the conflict, an S. The resolution, I had mixed feelings about the resolution. I would give it an A or a B. Emotional connection, I'd give it an A. Emotional payoff, also an A or a B, similarly to the similarly to the resolution. And then consequences of actions, an S. Obviously there were consequences at the end. Okay, so the reset route is leaning more towards an A, and I think it's a result of that ending not being as satisfying. So for the goodbye Ato route, the narrative, it's not that far off from the base timeline. The branching decision takes place at day 82, I think. So I would put it up there with a 5. We're still very late in the base, the reset second scenario. The lore expansion, this in itself does not expand on the lore itself. But we already had that expansion before that branching timeline. So like us being weapons of war, this not being Earth, etc., etc. So I would give it a 5, only because those are already pre-established. Character development, I would give it a 5. It is emphasizing on Ato. The pacing, the story in itself was very short, so I would give it a 5. The subject matter, I wouldn't dock any points off. Actually, you know what? I would probably dock points off of it, only because he took out his own eyes. I'd give it a 4. Conflict, I think I would give it a 5, but I would not give it very high rating for resolution, because you don't really see any of the resolution from his point of view. I would give it a 3 for resolution. Emotional connection, being in his mind and hearing his perspective on what's going on, I would give it a 4, because it's trying to get you emotionally invested in this character. The emotional payoff, I would also give it a... we'll give it a 3.5. Consequences of your actions. There was obviously consequences for saying, no, I don't want you to join my team. And also considering that it's very late in chapter 0, I would give consequences of my actions a 5, just because of all the pre-established decisions that were made. So Ato is hanging out at an A. Ato is hanging out at an A. Okay, so Rebellion route, the narrative, still relatively late in the game. I would give it a 5. Lore and expansion, I would give it a 5. Character development, do we see any character development for anyone, really? I guess there's character development in the sense that they are questioning their beliefs. But it's really not very juicy. Maybe a 4.5. I think the pacing was okay. Pacing was good. Subject matter, I don't think I would dock any points. I don't think I would dock any points for this one. Effectiveness of the conflict, 5. Resolution. The resolutions were more or less positive for either choice, even though it was a hard decision to make. I would give it a 4.5. Emotional connection, You have an emotional connection to Nozomi, but not necessarily Kamyun. I would probably give it a 4.5. 4. We'll give it a 4. Emotional payoff, 4. Consequences of your action, 5. You're essentially choosing whether or not like you're going to get peace sooner rather than later, if at all. So for the rebellion route, it is an S rank for me. Next is the Ava route, the as Niall would call it, the best route ever. The narrative. It's still rather late in the game, but you don't know about a lot of aspects of the world in chapter 0. Did I finish the game? I totally did finish the game. We are ranking every single route now. So the narrative at this point, we're going to focus on the route itself. The narrative for the Ava route, I think it was good. She ends up getting rid of her brainwashing and making an emotional connection with Takumi. They do end up leaving the academy. Kind of hard to say what I would give it for like scenario or a plot, because like it's still rather short. I think I would still rate it rather high. Lore and expansion, you do get to see the village outside of the school where the resistance is. And there is some lore expansion as far as like the commanders and how the resistance doesn't like Veshness. I think it's still pretty high up there. Character development, there is definitely some character development on Ava's part now that she is her own person again. There's some character development on Takumi's part. And expansion, there's obviously a connection that happens between the two of them. So I would give it a 5 between the two of them. The pacing I think was okay for this timeline. Subject matter, I mean, at this point the brainwashing has been removed, so I won't dock at any points for that. We'll keep it at a 5. The conflict is unchanged. Resolution. You know what? I didn't even go through the pictures for the Ava one. So there's one timeline where they go back to the school and Ava protects them. Well, protects them. She's protecting Takumi, who's protecting his friends. And then there's the ending where they end up starting to make a family, not going to save their friends, but they end up making a family and they're running away from Veshness. So those are the two endings that we experience in this timeline. I would give the resolution a 4 only because they're both open-ended. Emotional connection, there's a high emotional connection. I would give it a 5. Actually, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind closed doors, so we'll say 4.5. Emotional payoff, same as the emotional connection, I think, 4.5. Consequences of your action, there's definitely some consequences for your actions, so I would say 5. Oh, Niall's gonna be happy to know that, like, with my criterias, the Ava route goes up to an S. So for multiple Atos, the narrative, it was very short. But for a short story of, like, having to find the imposters at a disadvantage, I'd give it a 4.5. Lore expansion, there was no lore expansion. It was all in his head. So, I mean, I don't want to give it a 0 because it doesn't have it. We'll just leave it blank. Character development and expansion in a negative way. There was character development on Takumi's part, albeit a lot of them in a negative way. I would give it a 4, 3.5, 3.5 or a 4. We'll say 3.5. The pacing, it was very short. It was very short. It was a quick timeline to do, so I'm gonna give it a 5. The subject matter, it's losing points for subject matter because of that one timeline where I was like, Takumi, this is not gonna work, and then it didn't end up working. So I would give it a 2.5. It was hard to read. It was hard to read that timeline. Effectiveness of the conflict. Oh, there was certainly a conflict in his own mind. I would give it a 5. The resolution, depending what timeline you ended up choosing, the resolution, gosh, was there any good resolutions? There really wasn't. I would give it maybe like a 4. No, 3.5. No, 4. Oh, gosh, no, 3.5. I'm too nice. Emotional connection. There was some emotional connection where you're like, Takumi, you cinnamon roll. I hope you're okay. And like, just the love-hate relationship that I have with Eito, I would give it a 5. It was very emotionally driven. I wanted Takumi to win so bad. Emotional payoff, 5. Consequences, 5. There were consequences to your action, that's for sure. So the multiple Eitos is an A. It's an A for me. Next one, serial battles. Let me just say, I am very happy that by the time we got to serial battles, we were able to skip battles. But it was very immersive in the sense that I think I stayed up late one night when I was doing this timeline. Was there like a couple, 1 or 2 that we couldn't skip? Most of them we could skip, but there was a fight every like 1 or 2 days. And I was like, I don't know when to stop. I don't know when is a good time to stop. And we stayed up until like 1 or 2 in the morning. And I think I was equally tired as the students. I was like, oh my gosh, I just want to go to bed. And at the same time, I'm like, I want these kids to go to bed. Like they have to fight a fight every 1 or 2 days. Like I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it. But it was immersive in that sense, I guess. The narrative, there wasn't very much narrative for this timeline. It was just a timeline where you just did a bunch of fights. So I would give it a 3 for narrative. Lore expansion, there wasn't very much lore expansion. Character development, there wasn't any time. There wasn't any time to do character development because they were constantly fighting. They were constantly fighting. Yeah, I don't think there was any character development. Again, I would give it a 3. The pacing, I feel like the pacing, my rating for pacing would tank if you could not skip fights. But post update where you could skip fights, I'd say maybe a 3.5. The subject matter, there's nothing really to dock other than like there's lots of fighting, right? Maybe like a 4, because like it wasn't bad, but it wasn't, not that it's not engaging. Engaging isn't the word I'm looking for. It wasn't as captivating. Conflict, there was certainly a lot of conflict. Resolution, you ended up defeating Vashnes, I guess. So like that's a good resolution. 4, 4.5. Emotional connection, there was no time for emotional connection. I mean, the emotional connection was, God, I hate Vashnes because she keeps sending these enemies. And you know what? Maybe there was emotional connection because you just wanted these kids to sleep. You just wanted these kids to finally have a break. Let's give it a 4.5 for emotional connection. Emotional payoff. The decision at the end is my fight over or is my fight not over? So I feel like it was lacking in emotional connection at the end. We'll say 3.5. Consequences of my action. There were no actions to take except at the end of like, is my fight over or not? So I would give it like, there were some decisions leading up to it, maybe a 3. I feel like this one is not going to rank very high. You know what? It's still an A. It's still an A. But I think my heart would give it a B. But it's 4.1. I'm going to give it an A. So, for the conspiracy route. That one is short and sweet. The narrative. I mean, there's not much going for it for the narrative. I mean, they introduce a resistance. We never meet them because the satellite explodes. R.I.P. humanity. I will give it a 3. Only because there's more questions than answers. Lore expansion. I mean, there's a little bit of lore expansion because they tell you about the resistance, but that's about it. I'd give it a 3. Character development. There's no character development. I mean, I guess you get a connection with Kurata. And Takumi gets a little skeptical about the mission in general. But like there's not much character development. I would give it a 2. That actually I would give the serial battles character development a 2. 2. Pacing, story. It was a very short chapter. It was a very short chapter like the Eito one, so I mean I would give it a 5 just because it was very short and digestible. Subject matter, I'm not going to dock it any points for the subject matter. Effectiveness of the conflict. The conflict was not very effective. But there was either some conflict with Nico or there was some conflict with C-Ray, but it was not very effective. I would give it a 4. A 3.5. 4. 3.5. The resolution, there was no resolution. It's either you blew up or it was open-ended. I would give it a 3.5. Emotional connection. There was no emotional connection. Neutral. Neutral 3. Emotional payoff. There was that interaction at the end where they're questioning whether or not it's a good idea to blow up the planet and going against their commanding officer. So, intellectual, emotional payoff for that. Gosh. It made you think. I would give it a 3.5. Consequences of your action, I'm ranking it high only because it was just like quick succession of decisions, and the moment you gave the wrong one, it was game over. I think I'm being a little too nice because a lot of them are hitting an A, and I think my original spreadsheet, I have a lot more Bs. I mean, I have to be a little meaner. I think I'm gonna have to be a little meaner. Let me reevaluate everything. All my 0.5s, they're going down. She's gonna be mean. Even me being mean, it's a high score. Oh, my calculation wasn't right for the conspiracy one. It was still divided by 9 and not divided by 10. Serial battles is a B. And conspiracy. Oh, that's why it looked so high. It's because it was divided by 9 and not divided by 10. So conspiracy is also a B. Okay, that's revised. We have revised it. I don't want everything to be in an A. Then it's just not balanced. I thought the casual route was meh, but let's get our numbers in for the casual route. I had some short notes that said, like, it had the player asking what's going on with Takumi. It had some good comedic relief, let's be honest. The poker arc, I like the poker arc. The missing socks ones, that was weird. The juice box, that was also weird. But the pacing was slow. Oh, the pacing was excruciating. So the narrative, I'm gonna give the narrative a 3. Or you know what? No, I'm actually gonna give it a 4 because there was like 3 short stories. Lore and expansion, there was none. 1. Character development, there was no character development. I mean, does it count as character development if Takumi starts being aware that there's brainwashing going on? No, I would give it a 1 because it's all in his head. Pacing, excruciating. I would give it a 1. Subject matter, we're talking about brainwashing. It's being docked points because of that. I would give it a neutral, a 3. Conflict? There was no conflict. I mean, Sirei was the conflict. There was a little bit of conflict with Vashnes, but there wasn't really any conflict until the end where they were like, do you want to get rid of your brainwashing or do you want to keep being in this fake mindscape? So maybe a 3. Resolution. Depending where you went, it could be a good resolution. I would say a 4. Emotional connection. I'm thinking 4 because of Takumi being a cinnamon roll and me wanting him to be okay. Emotional payoff. I think I'm gonna say like 3. Only because there's that validation that something was in fact going wrong when you thought that things were a little weird. Consequences of your actions. There wasn't really any choices to make. So that's gonna be neutral. Oh, snap. We have our first C. Casual route is a C. Past Jess had this to say about the box of blessings. Past Jess had to say that there's a lot of exploring. Is that all that Past Jess said? That is all that Past Jess said. That's not very helpful now, is it? This was one of those like kind of wholesome timelines. It's where we find out about the box of blessings, and if you collect them all, you get a wish. So it's kind of like the Dragon Balls. The narrative, specifically for the scenario and the whole story with the boxes of blessings and calamity, I would give it a 4. Lore and expansion, I would give it a 5 because it's telling us about a folk tale or a legend about this planet. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna give it a 4. Character development. Oh gosh, character development. Oh, I'm giving character development a 5. There's great character development with Gaku and Shoma in this chapter. So I will give it a 5. Pacing. Oh, I put lots of exploring under pacing. I don't know if that's because I wanted to dock points for pacing because there is a lot of exploring, but you have the option to skip it if you want to because of after one of the updates that we had. So I will say a 4. Subject matter, I don't think there was anything to dock points of, so I will say a 5. Conflict, the conflict was to get all of the boxes before Veshness, and I think that was a 5. Especially the timelines where Ato was trying to intervene or sabotage our mission. Resolution, I think would be a 5. I think, especially if you chose something that was in your favor, where you ended up making the wish and not Veshness or Ato. Emotional connection, there's definitely an emotional connection to Shoma and Gaku. I would say a 5. Emotional payoff, depending which route you ended up choosing, it was a 5. Consequences of your action, leading up to the boxes of blessings and calamity, I would say, I mean, there wasn't a lot of there was some consequences. I would say a 5. And you know what I didn't do? I didn't go through the screenshots for the boxes of blessings. There was some comic relief in this chapter now that I'm going through the pictures. But yeah, there was some emotional connections with Gaku. He ended up growing as an individual and putting his selfish desires aside. JK, he wanted his own harem. But the result of that wish ended up reviving the 2 characters that we've missed for quite a bit. And then on the flip side, you end up getting an emotional connection with Shoma, and he grows as an individual. Okay, and then next is the boxes of calamity. So, what is our rating for the boxes of blessings? Boxes of blessings is an S. Yeah, it's an S, y'all. We got an S for the boxes of blessings. Boxes of... Where is it? Boxes of calamity. Past me just wrote down thrilling horror genre. Not helpful. The narrative, it was intriguing. The narrative was intriguing. I will give it that, but I don't do spooky very well. Lore expansion, I'm gonna give it a similar rating to the boxes of blessings, only because they go hand in hand together, and it also resurfaced the geese. Character development, it negatively impacted Takumi, let me tell you. I don't think there was any character development in itself, though we did get to see a bit of Kakoji. The characters reacting to all these bad things happening around them. Takumi being affected by all these bad things happening around him. But it wasn't like that juicy character development that I love. So I would say a 3. I would say it's neutral. The pacing was okay. The subject matter, we're gonna dock points for the subject matter only because of how the corpses some of them presented themselves. I also don't do very well with ghost stories, so it's being docked points for that. But I don't want to dock points for there being a ghost story or a serial killer, because that's just the genre that it was. So we'll say 4. The conflict, I would give it there was definitely a conflict. I would give it a 5. The resolution wasn't a very happy resolution. 3. Emotional connection, I was resonating hard with Takumi and his fear of the ghosts and his friends being picked off one by one. So I would say a 5 for an emotional connection with our dear friend Takumi. The emotional payoff and intellectual payoff. Neutral. I'm neutral on that. Consequences of your actions. There was definitely consequences to my actions. So where does that leave us for the Box of Calamity? Box of Calamity falls under an A. So our Box of Calamity comes up to an A. Now, I would love to put Cult of Takumi at a D right away. No pun intended. But let's give it an honest review. Yeah, I didn't like this timeline. I felt very uncomfortable doing this one. We're just gonna fly through these screenshots. Everyone falls in love with him. It's very awkward. I don't like it. It definitely makes for a villain. It's, Takumi has a making of a villain arc, and my dear friend Eito pushes him along hard. So very believable in the sense that, yes, this is the making of a villain arc. And how... Is it power? Would you call it power? That power can corrupt? Because he starts off as, like, you know, our awkward little cinnamon roll that makes dumb choices. And then at the end, he's just like, oh yeah, these are my followers. I can do whatever I want with them. Or like he's just unfazed by what they're doing. And I'm just like, oh, this makes me feel so uncomfortable. Oh boy, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I'll say it again. I'm happy that I did this one offline. Past me wrote short form notes of Takumi's villain arc displays how power can corrupt. Also wrote wild rewards many situations where I felt uncomfy. That's right, past me. So the narrative of it, the narrative is going to rank high only because it is a believable making of a villain arc. I am going to give it a 4. Lore expansion, there was no lore expansion. Everything happened within the walls of the school and you didn't learn anything new. So I'm going to give it a... Have I given a 1 for that yet? I gave multiple Eitos a 0 because it takes place in his own head. Casual, I gave it a 1 because it takes place in his own head. Why did I give casual a 1 and multiple Eitos a 0? It's only been an hour and a half and I already forgot what I did. Okay, lore expansion, I'm gonna give it a 0. There is no lore expansion. Mind you, this is the only timeline where he goes to the satellite. He gets a 1 for that. You know what? You get a 1 for going to the satellite. Good job. Character development in a negative way. There is some character development with Takumi. So I'm gonna give it a 4 for character development because it is a making of a villain's arc. The pacing... I would have been happy to get over this story a lot faster than it did. However, it wasn't excruciatingly long. It wasn't painfully long. It was actually just a couple hours. It wasn't slow. So I will give it a 4. Subject matter, 1. I didn't like the subject matter. I didn't like the subject matter. Even the characters that I shipped with him, I was like, oh no, they're doing this against their will. I don't like this. I don't like this. Conflict. Conflict. The effectiveness of the conflict. I mean, I guess like he's having a conflict against himself of like, should I or shouldn't I? I'm gonna say neutral. The resolution, I'm giving it a 2 for resolution because there's a couple of them that I just didn't like. Emotional connection. I did not connect emotionally with Takumi. I'm sorry, Cinnamon Roll. I didn't connect with you emotionally in this timeline. Um Emotional payoff. I really only think I like the ending for the Overlord one. But even then, leading up to it, I didn't like the decision that you had to make. So I'm going to give it a below neutral, a 2. Consequences of your action. There is definitely some consequences to your action. I think there's really just one choice at the end, whether or not you let Ato deal with Nozomi. That is your choice, and the consequences from that action are pretty significant. So I would give it a 5, only because there are definitely 100% some conflict, as there are some consequences to your actions. It's not a D. It's a C. After we give it an honest review, it's a C. Congratulations. You ranked in the same place as the casual arc. Past Me wrote a note of builds on the world and the antagonist's backstories, focuses on storytelling, short and digestible. Also writes down that Takumi dying with Veshna seemed out of place. Yes, that emotional connection to me even now seems a little out of place. For the narrative, there was definitely a focus on storytelling for this route, so I would give it a 5. Lore and expansion, there is expansion on a little bit on the world, but more so on the commanders, a little bit of on Adamaku, but a lot on Veshnes. Character development, you see some character development on Veshnes's side. Not like a total 360, but the whole like Takumi taking a hit for her, or her taking a hit for him. I would like to think that that's a result of character development and expansion. The pacing, it was short and digestible. The subject matter, not docking any points for subject matter, it was all right. There wasn't necessarily a conflict until at the end when they were initiating a coup d'etat. So I think the conflict was rather effective. The resolution, a couple of them seem out of place. I'm going to give it a 4. Emotional connection. There's an emotional connection. There seems to be an emotional connection between Takumi and Veshnes, and Tsubasa and Aramaku. So as the player, I think there's a little bit of emotional connection between those two dynamics. I would give it a 4. The emotional payoff. Ooh, I think I would give it a 4. I don't remember going like at the end. And then the consequences of your actions. Shoot, what was the choices for this one? I think the choices was whether or not you attack her, and that would change the ending. Either she kills all of your friends in front of you, or your friends end up taking her out and you're protecting her. So I think those are pretty significant consequences. And that ranks our Veshnes route up at an S. Did I originally put it up at an S? I had originally put it up at an A, but after breaking it down, it's more of an S. Coming of age. Past Me wrote, refreshing. Students felt like actual teenagers and grew as individuals. So that is a high 5 for a character development. Effectiveness of the conflict. Past Me wrote, Ato threw me off guard. Again. ... again. So there was definitely some conflict at the end, even though it was mostly a wholesome timeline. But going back to the beginning, narrative, I give it a 5 for a narrative. It was a nice coming of age slice of life story. lore and expansion. I don't think there was a lot of lore and expansion, but you did get to learn a lot about Shion. So I would give it maybe like a 3. A 3. The pacing, I think the pacing was fine. Subject matter was all right. Conflict, there's always Veshness, there's always Ato. Because the two of them are there, I think I'm gonna give it a 5. The resolution was wholesome. I liked it. There was definitely some emotional characters with the emotional connections with the cast of characters and the player. There was absolutely emotional payoff, consequences for your actions. I think there was definitely some consequences for my actions, but I don't recall them off the top of my head for some reason. Oh, yeah, there's a consequence of whether or not Nozomi is saved or not. After breaking it down, it comes up to an S. After breaking it down. So our coming of age, it's a higher ranking wholesome timeline. So what did pass me right about the Retsnom route? I wrote, love the narrative and what was done with Darumi. It was a good story. There was definitely some lore expansion. I'm going to give it a 4, similar to the Box of Calamity and the Box of Blessings. Character development, I'm going to give it a 5 between Darumi and Takumi. The pacing was good. Subject matter, not going to dock any points for the subject matter. The conflict was finding a way to revive their friends. I'm going to give it a high ranking. Also wrote a note here, the ending was unpredictable and made me feel like things were high stakes. So I'm going to give a high rank for Hook and Resolution only because of that. Definitely some emotional connection with Darumi and Takumi as well as the rest of the cast. The emotional payoff was definitely there, and there was absolutely some consequences for your actions. So, hey, look at that. Retsnom route is an S. I think it's one of my highest ranking endings. SF route. Past Me wrote, having the jumping characters remember different timelines was a good touch. It's something that I really want and anticipate from a game that has multiple timelines. So I really appreciated it when Takumi and Hideko finally remembered things from different timelines. I think my only qualm with this one is I kind of wish that, like, I don't know, it tested how well you paid attention to the story. If anyone has played Virtue's Last Reward, there's 5 bombs in the Institute, and they expect you to take note of all of the bomb codes so that you can go and defuse them in another timeline. I kind of wish that for the Liber Mortis codes, it gave the initiative to the player to remember the codes on your own. Granted, this game already did a lot, so I'm not going to dock it points for that, but I kind of wish that it did that. So the narrative, I'm going to give it a 5. It was a really good narrative. Lore and expansion, I'm going to give it a high... I'm going to give it a 4, only because Hideko didn't know as much as I did going through Chapter 0. That's why I'm only going to give it a 4. Character development and expansion. There was definitely some growth with Takumi and Hideko after remembering so many things, and there was an emotional connection between those two developing as well. I'm going to give it a 5. Pacing. The pacing was okay. I'm just going to give it a 4 only because of interruptions for lock 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. I forget which ones. The 2 locks that are in that timeline. I'm docking points for pacing because of those locks. Subject matter, not docking points for subject matter. Effectiveness of the conflict. The conflict was finding the best possible outcome, and there is one instance where you do get the best possible outcome. I'm gonna give it a 5. Resolution, depending where you're going, there are some pretty good resolutions. There's some that are a little more terrifying. We're going into the romance route here. So resolution, I'm gonna give it a 4. Emotional connection, there's definitely some emotional connection. Intellectual payoff. I'm gonna give it a high ranking for intellectual payoff and emotional payoff as well. And then consequences of your action, depending what you do, you could make or break whether or not you get the perfect ending. So I'm gonna give it a 5, which brings our SF route to an S. Romance route, another wholesome one, but I feel like it's gonna rank really low for a few reasons. What did Past Me write? Past Me wrote wholesome, adds depth to all the girls. Also wrote, as someone who's played dating sims, the pacing was very slow. I didn't like that it was one girl for the 25 days. Can we please split it up so that they have an even competition? Just saying. So the narrative for this one is neutral. I'm gonna give it a 3. There's not really any lore expansion because it's all contained within the school, so I'm not gonna give it anything for that. I'm gonna give it a 0. Character development, they're an expansion. You definitely learn a little bit more about the girls, but now that we know about our memories being fabricated, I don't know how I feel about that anymore. But as a standalone route, I'm going to give it a 5 only because it does build on each of the girls' characters and expands on their character. Pacing. The pacing was not good. I didn't like the pacing. I'm giving it a 1. Subject matter, I'm gonna give it a 4. It felt honestly a love story. Sorry, no. A love story in a war genre. It's not that feels out of place. It's a dating game in a war story that felt out of place. So I'm going to give it a 4 because of that. Conflict, there wasn't very much conflict except like who do I want to woo, so I'm gonna give it a 3 for neutral because it's neutral. Resolution, either you dated them or you didn't. So I'm gonna give it a 3 because that's neutral. There was some emotional connection. I'm gonna give it a 4. Intellectual and emotional payoff, neutral. Consequences of your actions, I'm gonna say neutral as well. Or no, I'm gonna give it a 4. So the romance route is a B. What did Past Me write about the slasher route? Slasher route. Thrilling murder mystery. The 4 scenarios blended well together and it had a compelling plot. And then under pacing, I wrote the running scenes. Oh yes, this was the running timeline. I'm gonna docket points for pacing under gameplay because the running was just weird. We're gonna just give it a 4. We're gonna give it a 4. Narrative, I'm gonna give it a 5. The lore and expansion, there wasn't really any like expansion on the world itself. So I'm gonna give it it was all pretty self-contained in the school. Right? It was all pretty self-contained in the school. The only thing that was new was the person in the suit, and we have no idea where this suit came from. We have no idea where this suit came from. Oh, I think there was a timeline with an invader. Oh no, we meet the geese. So there was some lore expansion. This is all the same route, by the way. Okay, now we're going into comedy. So lore and expansion, we're gonna give it a 4 just because of the geese and the introduction of the suits, even though we have no idea what the suits are from. Character development, there was some good character development. There was a dynamic starting between Hideko and Takumi, between Kurata and Takumi. The fact that he was one of the zombies that still had a sense of self. I would say I would give it a 4 for character development and expansion. Pacing, I had given it a 4 because of the running scenes. Subject matter, I love me a murder mystery. Effectiveness of the conflict, I'm going to give it a 5 because it was high stakes. Resolution, there was always a resolution, albeit not always good, not always bad. But there was a resolution. I'm going to give it a 4 for resolution. Emotional connection, I definitely felt anxious with the rest of the cast some of the times. I'm going to say 4. Emotional and intellectual payoff, 5. Consequences, 5. So our slasher route is an A. Did I originally put it at an A? I put slasher originally at an S. It's sitting at a 4.5, which is technically an S. Comedy route. Past me wrote hilarious slapstick humor, nice palate cleanser between more serious timelines. Also wrote filler material, no meaningful plot elements disclosed. I love how me through like the first few timelines was like, yes, I'm going to write meaningful short form reviews. The narrative, there wasn't a lot of narrative. It was clearly filler. I'm gonna go, but there was four pretty separate scenarios. So I'm gonna give it a neutral because for them being different. Lore and expansion, it was all in the walls of the school. There was no lore expansion. It was clearly filler. I'm gonna put a 1. Actually, I'm gonna put a 0 because it was all contained in the school. Character development and expansion. I appreciated the fourth wall breaking, but I don't think there was really like any character development and expansion per se. I'm gonna say neutral. The pacing, I can see it being long for some people that don't really appreciate filler material. So I'm gonna give it a 3 for neutrality. Subject matter, I'm not gonna really dock it any points for subject matter. But I'm gonna give it a 4. Conflict, the conflicts were ridiculous. I'm gonna give it a neutral 3. The resolution, some of them were really ridiculous. 2. Emotional connection, there wasn't really any emotional connection. I'm gonna be neutral with 3. Intellectual payoff, no. Emotional payoff, not really. Though I did appreciate that one timeline where he had smartass syndrome, and I was saying what he was thinking before he was even thinking it. I'm gonna give it a 3 for neutral. Consequences of your action, I mean, there were some consequences. They were pretty dumb consequences. So I'm gonna give it a 4, which means it actually ranks pretty high. 2.8. It ranks a B. The comedy route is a B. Killing game route. I do love me a killing game. I do love me a killing game. Who's excited for Danganronpa 2x2? I am. Short form me, past me, wrote under character development and expansion, introduction of commune. Relationship between Nozomi and Ava and commune was weird. What else did I write? Emotional connection, Tsubasa Takumi, thumbs up. Intellectual, emotional payoff, remaining cast, finding hope in despair, loved it. Consequences of actions, high stake plot, bad ending as soon as you make a decision. Thank you, past me, because I barely remember what happened. Narrative, good narrative. Lore building, they talk about how Hemo Anima has the power to grant wishes, assuming there's like certain conditions that are met. So I think that there's like definitely some lore building in that sense. For the most part, everything takes place. No, some things take place on the outside. We learn about a factory. We learn about quite a few things. I'm gonna say it's a 4. Character development and expansion. There's expansion. I'm gonna give it a high rating for character development um, because of the changes you see in Yugamu, Tsubasa, Darumi, and Takumi at the end. Pacing was good. Subject matter, good. Effectiveness of the conflict, great. Resolution, you get rid of the sponsor, so I mean the resolution is good. Emotional connection with Tsubasa and Takumi, loved it. Emotional Tsubasa with the quartet, loved it. Emotional connection with Nozomi and everyone else, I was not a huge fan. I'm gonna give it a 4. Intellectual or emotional payoff, I am going to give it a 5 because they found hope within despair, and then a 5 for consequences of your actions. The verdict is we have a 4.8. The killing game route is ranked an S. I have a lot of S's, and I'm trying to be mean. So, for the mystery timeline, short form notes. Narrative. Needing to unlock endings felt like a classic multi-ending story. And that's literally all that I wrote. So for the narrative, I would write a 5. Lore expansion, knowledge of the world. It was a mystery, so there wasn't very much information per se. I'm gonna say 3 for neutral. Character development and expansion. I think I'm gonna give a high ranking for that. Probably a 4. The character development was more on the anxiety side of things. But Nozomi does end up sacrificing herself to save Takumi at some point. So maybe a 4. Yeah, a 4. The pacing. I'm going to give the pacing a 4. Not that it dragged, but only because of that interruption where you had to do a whole bunch of timelines before you could come back. Subject matter, I'm gonna give it a 5. I love mysteries. Effectiveness of the conflict was trying to find the serial killer, so the conflict was very effective. The resolution at the end, once you actually do find the killer, there was a resolution, so we're gonna say 5. Emotional connection. Takumi ends up passed out a lot of the time. I'm gonna give it a 4 for emotional connection. Intellectual payoff, I'm gonna give it a 5. Emotional payoff, I gave emotional connection a 4, so I'm gonna keep it at a 5. Consequences of your actions. There was totally some consequences for your actions. So I'm gonna give it a 5. And our mystery route is at an A. So this is our final tier list. Our final tier list. There's a lot of S's. And this is me trying to be mean. Yikes. So we have second scenario, Rebellion, Ava, Box of Blessings, Feshness, Coming of Age, Retsam, SF, Slasher, and Killing Game at an S. The first playthrough, Reset Route, Goodbye Ato, Multiple Atos, Box of Calamity, and Mystery is at an A. Serial Battles, Conspiracy, Romance, and Comedy are at a B. And then Casual and the Cult of Takumi are at a C. I'm kind of like cringing a little bit inside that the Cult of Takumi is equal to the Casual. But it is what it is. I broke it down. I gave it a fair shot. So that's my tier list for 100 Line Last Defense Academy. And we are officially done. We are officially done with 100 Line Last Defense Academy. It has been a journey. Holy crow. What an endeavor, though. What an endeavor for, well, an endeavor for me, but what an endeavor for Tukio Games. Good job, y'all. But yeah, that's where I'm gonna end the YouTube video. So, anyone who's coming in on YouTube, thanks for watching. I'll have some more stuff of the variety of things eventually. Have a lovely time zone. We'll catch you next time.